Hello and welcome to part 4 of my Imperial Knight Titan guide. So, here it is. Oh wait, hang on. Yeah, so here it is. It's already, the base is glued and glued as it can be. So now what I'm going to do is take this off right now. There you go. And I'm going to spray the whole thing, take the arms off. It's got to hurt. And spray them separately, spray everything separately in my Chaos Black, which is here. So I'm going to spray it. If you haven't used your spray for a long time, give it a massive old shake. And as always, 2 thin layers are better than 1 big thick layer. It hasn't been good weather here in Norfolk for a while. It's been so windy, so wet. I'm complaining, but it's just a fact. It's been crap weather. It's been pretty nice weather today, so it's an Apple opportunity to go and undercoat the model. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'll join you in the garden. Let's go. Once you've sprayed the model and it's dried and it looks a little bit like this, I would leave it for a good 3-4 hours just to make sure that it's completely dry before you attempt to paint it. He's been dry for about quite a few days actually, and he's starting to get a little bit of dust because sometimes you don't have a whole weekend to spray and paint one model. Sometimes it can be over a few days. So if he is getting a bit of dust on him, just use any kind of brush and just brush that dust off. You can use air in a can if you really want to, but sometimes that does leave a wet mark or residue on. Just dust off all the dust, I suppose. Make sure your painting area is nice and clean and ready. You've got all the paints that you need. Your brushes either side. You've got your glue and things just in case you break anything or whatnot. You've got a fresh pot of water, cold water preferably, not hot. There are reasons for that. You've got some tissue, wipe off any excess off your brush, and you've got a palette, preferably a clean one. I'm going to have to clean that one in a moment. Best way is just hot soapy water to clean that, and a little scouring pad if you've got one. But make sure your painting studio or part is up and ready. With all my models, this is what I've got. So you might have something a bit more lavish, but make sure you've got your lamp. I've got an LED lamp. It's got loads of different brightness settings with a really wide dispersal of light, and I think when you're painting, that's one of the most important things, is light. If you are in a place where you've got a lot of natural light, like a conservatory or a greenhouse or something like that, then that's probably going to be better. But failing that, get yourself a really good LED lamp. So now we're ready to paint, and the first thing I'm going to do is completely, with a nice layer of lead belcher, aka bolt gun metal, aka metal. I'm just going to cover the whole model. Well, apart from the carapace. So the arms, both the arms, which I have not glued yet, which is fine. Paint the whole model, everything, with this lead belcher. And I'm going to use a large dry brush for that. One thing I will say is, obviously I've got my iMac here underneath this sheet, is make sure that things that you don't want painted, like speakers, lamps, iMacs, are covered with a sheet or something, so that if you are spraying away, I know that's quite a fair distance, but sometimes I have got paint quite a few feet away, or a foot or two away from where I've been doing it, and if you see, it's quite easy to flick some paint off and it land wherever. So make sure, if you've got a small area like I have, or you've got a computer nearby, that you cover it. Just the common sense kind of things, because you don't want to end up with a little two quid bit of paint on something that's thousands of pounds worth, really, that's spoiled. So that's just a little tip. Keep your area free from any expensive valuables. The paint isn't too difficult to get off, like get off a table or anything like that. You know, but if you've got anything of value nearby, you don't want that changing colour. So you've taken all the dust off your model, and you've got your, now it will focus, using the large dry brush. If you haven't washed it, if you haven't used the brush for a long time, what I would do, just realised I cut myself. Yeah, don't know how. Oh well, I haven't been playing with any knives today. But essentially, what you do is, if you haven't used it for a while, give it a good wash, but give it an even better dry, because this dry brush loves to soak up the water. It's a dry brush. That's what it's kind of been created to do, to take, to only leave you with the pigment of the paint. So when you're painting normally with a normal brush, you'd wash your brush. You wouldn't spend too long drying it because the water would come off quite quickly. Whereas a dry brush, it tends to hold on to the water a bit more. So make sure it's thoroughly dry though, and go ahead and just start applying your lead belcher paint. So quick tip for you, if you've been using your brush and you haven't used your paint for a while and you haven't got much left, what I mean by that is you've shaken it, but you pour it, it pours out quite slow rather than, you know, runny. Your best bet to avoid like clumping up the paint itself and making deposits on there is just to get a brand new one, really, because you don't want clumps of paint messing up the detail on this model. So I've used as much as I dare, and now I'm just going to, for the weapons at least, use a brand new pot. So when you are completely happy that your Knight Titan is, this skeleton base is completely painted in lead belcher, what I would do is wash your brushes, your large dry brush and your large brush, which is what I use to go over some of the detail points to get in the places where there's still a little bit of the black undercoat. Then you finish with those brushes, so give them a really good wash under a tap rather than in your pot, because you'll have a lot of lead belcher residue in the pot, so important under the tap. Leave the base coat of the lead belcher to dry, I'd say for at least half an hour, preferably an hour. You want to make sure that that's completely dry. After you've base coated the model with lead belcher, what I would do is wait 10 or 15 minutes for it to dry to the touch. The next step, I would use this Balthasar Gold to pick out some of the parts of the model to make them pop out and stand out. I'll show you that in a moment. Okay then, so it's probably at this point that I have a little look and remind myself of the piece of, I look at my guide or my previous model that I've made and look at, just remind myself of which areas I did paint Balthasar Gold. Painting the gold is something that I will do separately, but for now you're interested in just the, you know, the skeleton side of things and the weapons of where you painted that bronze colour. Got my guide nearby and I'll be using that while I just paint the Balthasar Gold on the weapons and on the model itself. I'll be using the large brush too. So once you're finished with your Balthasar Gold, I'd let it dry for 10-15 minutes, something like that. Then I'd move on to a standard brush or even a fine detail brush. Probably going to hit up the detail brush actually. And then what I'm going to do is just use some lead belcher and clean up some of the areas in the crevices of where I've gone over with the Balthazar Gold by mistake. And then I would leave that to dry for about probably 20 minutes, half an hour, maybe a bit longer actually, because the model at the moment, it's had a couple of hours, still slightly sticky, so maybe give it an hour or two. Now that you're satisfied that all your pieces and the model itself has dried, paints have dried that you've put on it, the next step will be to apply your shader, which I'm going to be using Nuln Oil. I have about a quarter in there, so that might not be enough. So make sure that you do have a spare pot just in case you run out, because you don't want to be shading half the model, forget where you are, it can leave all sorts of things. So make sure you have a secondary pot just in case you run out. Give it a bit of a shake like you paint, and I'll be using large dry brush. I wash this thoroughly. I've tried to get as much of the metallic powder from the lead belcher off as I can. It's completely dry too, completely dry, completely clean. Your best bet is to wash it under the tap. If you're having problems, don't use just your water pot. Wash it under the tap for ages. Leave it to dry for an hour or two. Obviously you can use a bit of kitchen roll to speed up that process, but I'd still leave it to dry as well, because you don't want to contaminate your Nuln Oil, because you might be using that for other colours and you don't want bits of metal in it. So like I said before, I'm going to coat the main skeleton of the Imperial Knight with the Nuln Oil everywhere, give it a massive wash, and the same for the weapon arms. Okay, so once you're satisfied that you've washed the weapon arms and the Knight Titan itself, once you're satisfied that you've covered all the areas, the next step is you're going to do it again, but you're now going to wait at least an hour before you put the second coat on. Once your Nuln Oil is completely dried on the model, this is the pose I'm going to kind of go for. Like, he's striding forward, he's going to be at the front. I think it's quite a decent pose. So I might glue the arms in that position just so that they're easier to paint a little bit later on. But once your Nuln Oil is completely dry after about an hour and a half, 2 hours, something like that, you're then going to put a second coat of Nuln Oil on, and then leave that to dry for at least an hour and a half, I'd say, and then we'll move on to the next stage.